We're live.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Mental Health Staff Hour, episode 3, all about resilience today. So thank you very much for your support over the last 2 episodes, and thank you for joining us today. So please do share this episode afterwards. It's exactly the same link if I've emailed you via my mailing list. It's the same link for the live stream as it is for watching the recorded version. So we are joined by Andy today, who will get to introduce himself shortly. So if you are new to this series, my name is Sam Tyrer. I'm the Prevention and Engagement Lead at Lancashire and South Cumbria Foundation Trust. I'm also the founder of an educational service called Change Talks, which basically aims to prevent ill health in young people. And I'm also the co-host of this show, which is very nearly 1 year old. Dave.
I don't know. It is 1 year old some point this month, isn't it?
Next week, and
next week. Oh, okay. Yeah. Had a look. Awesome. So I am Dave, aka Mindset by Dave. It says it over my shoulder, just in case anyone forgets. That's actually my real name. My mum called me that. It's on my passport. And I am the co-host of here, the host of a podcast called Master the Mind, Master Anything, the host of this channel, and basically just someone who is out there trying to be the change he wants to see in the world in mental health. So trying to educate, inform, and help people with their mental health, because quite frankly, I needed that a lot when I was younger.
Thanks, Dave. So if anyone has any questions, the chat function is open throughout the whole of this episode. I think, Dave, do people have to register on YouTube to be able to interact?
You can watch it without an account, but you have to have an account in order to chat. But an account on YouTube's free. So.
Perfect. So Dave will be monitoring that throughout the episode. And if you want to ask any questions or give me any feedback following this session, then email me on sam.tyrer, so Tyrer, at lscft.nhs.uk. So now to introduce our guest, Andy. Would you like to introduce?
Hello, good morning everyone. My name is Andy Hesketh and I work for Organisational Development for Lancashire and South Cumbria. And I'm very lucky because I love my job, and part of that job is delivering resilience, which I've been doing for many years, and it's a subject that's very close to my heart. I'm mindful of a couple of things. One thing, I'm mindful that it's the 1st of April, so I'm very mindful of that today, and I'm really looking forward to doing this. It's something new to me in terms of this arena, so let's see how it goes.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. And as Andy is our only guest today, we've normally had a handful of different people. I will be asking Dave to contribute in sections as well. So we'll basically go straight into it. We've got a few different bullet points that we've discussed beforehand. So resilience and happiness, Andy, is there a connection between the two?
Yeah, right. Resilience and happiness. What can I do about that? Let me just try something here. Let me just see if this works for you. Let's try it. And guess what? Do you know, I started a question today, and I said to people, what's the worst thing that could happen right now? What should have happened was this. It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Now she's here, you can take a break.
Unfortunately, the worst thing that could happen to us now is that we could get a copyright strike on our account for that music. This video might get pulled because of that. It hopefully will just mute the audio, but I wish you'd have warned me we were doing that, because we're not allowed to have copyrighted music played on the stream.
Right.
It doesn't matter. We'll carry on.
Thanks for that, Dave. Like I said, that question that I always ask myself at the beginning, what's the worst thing that could happen? Has probably just happened. Let it go. So there you go. That's testing my resilience. So let's have a think about the question. What's the connection, resilience and happiness? Well, as you've just heard there, I just belted out the tune that is about happiness. And actually, when we talk about happiness and we talk about resilience, is there a connection? There most certainly is. There's a field of work called psychoneuroimmunology. Fabulous word, that, isn't it? Word of the day, maybe, possibly. Psychoneuroimmunology. What is it? It's more commonly known, they abbreviate it to PNI. And it's that idea of having that positive outlook on life and a cheery disposition. Now, that tends to be, that's old as the hills. It's a bit like an old wives' tale. But believe you me, there's an awful lot more to it. And I'm, in my resilience work that I do, I'm very much involved with the mind's impact on health. And that, for me, when you start looking to the resilience material, the mind's impact on health is very, very important. It plays an integral part in resilience. So therefore, a good way to think about happiness is, we can't be in a perpetual state of happiness. That's not possible. And maybe a good way to think about it is this: to appreciate the highs, we've had to experience the lows. Now, one thing I'd like to just throw out here is that when I do my presentations, I often put a phobia in. And I don't know whether I can, Sam, can I throw a question out to people and do it that way? If I said to somebody, what do you think cherophobia might be the fear of? How would that work? Perhaps David like to come in on that, maybe?
Cherophobia.
I don't know what that is.
The fear of kerosene. The fear of Kerry Katona. That's all I got.
It's a Greek origin. I like to start off with a phobia. And actually, there is a big hint to what we started off with. I have had some fantastic answers, Dave, and they were great answers, by the way. I've had some great answers to that. Fear of Cheryl Cole is probably one of the tops. With you. That was a great one. But actually, it's the fear of being happy. It's the fear of happiness. And the reason why I think there's a real link between, when you're in a state of happiness, your resilience is naturally high. Mm-hmm. But we can't be in a perpetual state of happiness. It's not possible. Which is why it's about appreciating the highs. We have to experience the lows. And that word appreciate is very important. There's a danger. There's a little cartoon character from my past, and I'm showing my age a lot here. And it's a guy called Charlie Brown. And there's a wonderful little cartoon caption of Charlie Brown, and he's sort of led against the wall like this, and he's sort of ruminating. And he says, I think I'm afraid to be happy, because whenever I get too happy, something bad always happens. And what can happen, what the key message for me around that is, if you were cherophobic, that's how your mind would work. It's a bit like this. When things are going well, there's a danger sometimes. We get a little niggle, we get this little voice, and it says, wow, this is too good to be true. This is not going to last. Can't believe this is happening. Actually, what we should be doing is, do you know what? This is great. I'm going to embrace this. This is good. Because we know that in life, it's ups and downs. And so to me, in answer, the question we started off with, Sam, about resilience and happiness, and is there a connection? Absolutely. Definitely there's a connection. There's no doubt about that.
So why, this could go to Dave or Andy, why do you think that when people are happy, they are thinking that something is going to go wrong? Because personally, I struggle with this. You know, when I feel like I'm in a really good mood, and say it's lasting for a couple of days, I am thinking in my mind, something's going to go wrong. Why is that happening? I don't know whether Andy, Dave, whoever.
Yeah. I think it's probably down to, and it's a great question, and giving that some thought, we tend to be naturally triggered to a negative bias.
Yep.
And there's no doubt about that. If you look at the development of human beings, the human brain, it goes back to think of caveman times, and it's about survival. And we have this negative bias that's there. And I think probably, if you think like that, Sam, where you've just said that, it's probably something to do with that. I suspect. And it's a case of what can we do to work on that potentially would help you, Sam, enjoy that moment to stop that niggling thought coming in your mind.
Dave, do you want to come in next?
Yeah,
I know you've mentioned something like this in the past
I
as well.
I have bipolar disorder, so we've talked about this quite a lot, and I talk about emotional hangovers. I almost anticipate them now, but when I was a kid, if I was here, my brain would tell me it's always going to be like this. When I was here, my brain would tell me this is going to come crashing down. And as you just said then, I would never take time to appreciate and enjoy that moment at the top. I'd always just be thinking ahead of when it's going to be like, it's going to come crashing down and I'm going to be there. The irony of that is, if it's always like this, then this never exists. And if this comes down, then this too must come up. But my brain still believed all of those things up until like sort of my late 20s. And I now know that I'm actually going to have these emotional hangovers whenever I do something. The pursuit of happiness, I can understand that cherophobia, because the pursuit of happiness for me is I know that there's an emotional hangover coming after things. But the reason being is that we deal with everything by comparison. So a normal day for me feels normal in comparison to kind of slightly elevated mood. And whereas to excessively elevated mood, a normal day feels closer to depression by comparison. So it moves that kind of benchmark. It's the whole, I imagine you've probably come across the hedonic treadmill kind of principle as well. And I believe that, like, obviously, yeah, we are primed to notice the things that can hurt us more, and we're primed to stay away from the things that could hurt us more. That's good. It's good that we have that, because if we didn't, well, we'd probably all be dead, because it's just like, oh, cute little kitty stroking the saber-tooth tiger. But yeah, so I think it's more than likely down to the same principle as the fact that our brains tell us, oh, this can't last forever. Something's coming and we need to be prepared. But as we well know from all the stuff we've done on anxiety, preparation doesn't turn into preparation often. It turns into panic, and it turns into, when our brain goes into the future of when it's worse, it invites the future of when it's worse into now, and we feel as if it's already bad. So we can't actually experience that whole thing. We talk about people getting stressed about being stressed, depressed about being depressed, anxious about being anxious. Like what Andy's saying there is, actually, if we take the time to be happy about how happy we are, if we take the time to appreciate, I'm in a good place right now. Right now, I'm in a good place. This is great. I'm going to appreciate that. Because when we're in a bad place, we don't appreciate that. We don't appreciate it, but we certainly pay a lot of attention to it. So yeah, there's a lot to it there.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah. Do you want to come in on that, Andy? Or?
No, absolutely echoing some of that. And I think, when you start looking at the resilience stuff, there's connections with, I'm a great believer in the emotional intelligence stuff. And I think what Dave was aligning to there is, I like to simplify things, and it's around, your rational brain, your emotional brain, and your primitive brain, which there was what Dave was talking about. There's a real connection to that, and you're absolutely right. We're wired that way for safety, and he's absolutely right. I can do a little analogy there, and which Dave was sort of aligning to. When it's very important, sometimes when we feel emotional about things, there's nothing wrong with that. We feel passionate about some things, but there's dangers sometimes that we can stray into primitive brain, when actually that's not the best place to be. But primitive brain is not always a bad thing. It's about safety. But what we try and do, if we can, we try and engage with the rational brain, and then we can maybe make decisions and do things and have choices that potentially we're making a better choice. So, for example, it wouldn't be great if we're in rational brain all the time. So to give an example, if a man-eating lion, was to walk through where you are now, Sam, and your response was, are you sure you should be in here? And where's your name badge? Where's your name badge? It'd eat you.
You're not indigenous to Lancashire.
So what I'm getting at is, your primitive brain kicks in for survival. I think what happens is, sometimes there's a danger that we get into primitive brain too much, inappropriately, and it's taking that step back.
Right.
That really reminded me of what Dave did a great answer there, and that's what brought that up.
Yep.
Yeah.
So how exactly do we define resilience? What is it?
Yeah. Really interesting that. I've got if we were in a classroom situation and I was doing the teaching, I would split people into groups and I bounce that question out. And you get various responses to it. I've got 4 here, and I think these 4 sum things up pretty well. First one is, what is resilience? The ability to adapt to adverse conditions whilst maintaining a sense of purpose. And we hear that expression an awful lot, sense of purpose. And it's very important that we have this sense of purpose at work. If we take the NHS, for example, there's over 350 different job roles in the NHS, and we all work in teams. All those job roles are part of a team and part of a service. And when we have that sense of purpose in our work and working for that team and service, it's really, really good. And that helps us a lot. If we can take that sense of purpose into a home life as well, fantastic. And it's also about having a balance between positive mental and physical well-being. There's an intrinsic link to well-being and resilience. So that's a pretty good descriptor. Another one would be the power to cope with adversity and adapt to challenges or change. And that's a classic one. The NHS, for example, if we give that example as again, there are so many changes happening perpetually within the NHS, and we've got to be able to try and cope with that. The other one, the ability to bounce back, and I think that's bounceability is something that we hear an awful lot of, that bouncing back, and it's very much connected with resilience, that, and I can talk about that a little bit later on as well, making that analogy with that. And the final one will be adapting to hardships and setbacks in life. I think a key word in resilience, and I think it's cropped up probably at least twice, if not 3 times there, is the word adapt and adapting. We are blessed with this fantastic human brain, and one of the things that we are able to do is adapt. If we think about that, that's been key for our survival. And so therefore, if we've got things in place that help us adapt better, then it's going to be far better for our resilience levels.
Dave, do you want to come in with anything there?
No, I think Andy's just done it perfectly, really. I think what the one line that we used last time we spoke about resilience, though, was resilience isn't kind of not experiencing any hardships. It's not having an easy or a charmed life. It's basically how you respond to those. Resilience, you actually can't even weirdly have resilience if you've never experienced hardship, or if you don't experience hardship because it's never really been tested.
And it's interesting, just going back to the first point in regards to happiness and resilience. It's, if I was really, really happy and I went through something quite challenging in my life, my thought process will probably be like, I can get through this, I can deal with this. However, if I was in a really low mood at that time, you're more likely to think, why always me? And just out of interest, and Dave, I think you might be able to answer this one. How can someone flip that thought process when they are in that low mood, if they're always thinking, why always me, when things do happen to them?
There's an expression.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's an expression I quite like, which is that things aren't happening to you, they're happening for you. And what can you take from this experience now? Why always me? It's we do that thing. It's like, don't compare your outtakes to someone else's highlight reel. We first of all don't have a clue what's going on with anybody else. Weirdly, even though negativity bias is there, we assume that everyone else's life is better than us. So we assume positivity about other people, and we assume that other people aren't necessarily going through hardships. So if you actually are always asking, why me? It's not. It's like that what's wrong with me question that we've banned. Like when you ask why me, your brain is going to answer that question with why you think it should be you. All of that is going to drag you down and make things even harder for you. So you're going to make you feel less resilient, because you're never going to go, why me? Well, because I'm a resilient person and therefore life sends challenges at me because I know I can handle them. That's not going to be the answer you come back with. It's going to be like, I'm unlucky, or nobody likes me, or it's going to be all of these things. And we go back to that question, how could I do this instead? how could I do this? And I think where people get lost a little bit on that is when they say, why can't I do this, or why me, they come up with 5, 6, 7 different ways in which they can't do it, or 5, 6, 7 ways in which they're not capable. And whereas they ask, how could I do this, they come up with maybe 1 or 2 answers as to what step they could take moving forward. And people see that and it's like, I've got 7 reasons I can't and 1 reason I could. And it's like, okay, but we only actually need 1 way. We only need 1 way to get through this. You don't need 7 ways to get through this. You just need the 1. So I would say anyone who's asking that why me question, just understand that your brain loves to answer the questions in very specific ways. So if you're asking why me, it's always going to answer negatively towards that. If you ask, how could I get through this instead, that's going to have you looking, what resources could I ask for? Who could I ask for help? Where could I get help? How can I get through this? How have I got through these things before? Like, these type of things are going to start giving you answers, start giving you solutions. The why me for is always going to be problem based, and we're our own biggest critics, like absolutely our own biggest critics.
Andy, do you want to come in with anything there?
Yeah, no, really interesting that. Really interesting. I think actually, when we come to the bit, when we move on, there will be a link to what the points that Dave's made. It's a bit eerie, really. When Dave's speaking, it's like it's almost like he knows what I'm going to bring up next. That's not possible. So I'm I'm thinking that it's a bit spooky, this guy, because for the next thing that's that.
It needs to rebrand to Mystic Dave.
I'll tell you one thing, Dave. When you what you've said there, rather interestingly, I don't know whether this happens to you. Something popped up this morning on the social media thing. I always have a little peruse. I don't do a lot of social media. I tend to look for the positive things. I look for the positive things in people. The moment I meet somebody, it's like what's the spine running through them, and that kind of thing. But there was a lovely little quote, and it said, if you could write a note to your younger self, what would you say in 2 words? And I thought that was quite...
In 2 words?
In 2 words. If you could write a note to your younger self, what would you say in 2 words? And there was one thing on there that leapt out when I looked at the responses, and it was, love yourself. And I'm a great believer in that. And there's an integral link to resilience and that. And what you were just talking about then brought that up. And you want to, I think that's a key part. I mean, if you think about that for a minute, I think, Sam, when you were posing that question about, why always me? And actually, I think also, I'm sure Dave will agree with this, sometimes we get in the mindset like we feel we don't have a choice, and we have no choices, when actually we do have a choice. But when we get in that kind of mindset, it feels like we don't. That if we can just actually step back, and it's that rational brain thing, and that if I think about it, actually you have got choices, and a lot of people don't think they have.
Yeah. Have either of you ever read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl?
No, it's on my list though.
Well, Viktor Frankl was a psychologist who was detained in Auschwitz, and basically he didn't have many choices about over there, but he said he always had the choice of how to respond. And there was always choice even within these terrible choices. Really does put a lot of things in perspective, because we always have a choice, and sometimes as well we forget that we have good ideas. Most of us have really good ideas for other people, but we forget that we have good ideas when it comes to trying to solve our own problems. And I think we've had that drilled into us, We've had that whole don't brag, don't boast kind of thing drilled into us as kids. And unfortunately, that was to stop us from being egotistical maniacs. But unfortunately, it also stops us from being able to give ourselves a compliment, being able to trust in our abilities to look out for ourselves, and leads to something called learned helplessness, which is I can't solve my own problems. It must need someone else. The world much needs to change in order for me to do better. The outside world must change. I have to rely on the government to change policy, or I have to rely on people to treat me better. And if you always believe that the locus of control is outside and is always with the external world, then you're gonna feel powerless. and feeling powerless is like, well, powerlessness is a feeling, it's like, it's not an objective thing on what is this person's power. How this person feels and how powerful they feel is a person's power or a person's powerfulness.
How do we change that then? Because I'd probably say that the majority of people, well, a lot of people,
the majority of people we come into contact with because of the type of work that we do.
Well, yeah, they don't love themselves. How can we challenge that and change that going forward? Anyone?
I bet we've both got a lot to say on this. I'll let Andy speak because he's the guest. I'm just the guy in the chair.
I'm loving this. The only thing is, what I will say is, it's sort of coming up into the next question Sam's going to bring. I think this will come out, and then I'm sure Dave will interact on it. So I think that's
perfect. It's like when I listen to something I like, I think I'm going to chuck a few questions in there. We'll move on to this one, and then we'll come back to this point as well. Yeah. So how do we build up resilience? How do individuals do that? Because obviously this last year especially has challenged so many people, and it will have really tested people's resilience. So how exactly can we help people build that up?
Yeah. Right. Now, like I said, we've been aligning to this with the previous set of questions. One of the key things, I think, for resilience and for a lot of things is, if you were to start, I could show a film, and I could show you a film, and I'd say to you, now there's a lot of obvious things in this film, but actually, we're all guilty of forgetting the obvious at times and missing it. So if I was to put up like a bit like a recipe, if you will, and I said, yeah, here's a recipe for you, and this will help you build your resilience, and it'll help you make you realize that you have actually got choices, and actually it'll help you shake off the fact that it isn't always you, and you're in that mindset. So there's all sorts of things you could throw in. Now, I mentioned this about when I did the defining resilience, I was saying about that intrinsic link to well-being. So some of the obvious things would be eat, sleep, and exercise well. People will look at that and think, yeah, we know that. It's obvious. Of course it's obvious. But if I was just to rhyme things off, so you've got eat, sleep, exercise well. Time to reflect. The way you think. Is it always, do you tend to focus on the negative thoughts rather than the positive? Get yourself a mentor, for example. Keep loads of social contacts. That's something that COVID's had a massive effect on, by the way. Doing simple kindnesses for others. Make space to be yourself. There's lots of things that we can do, and a lot of the things I've rhymed off there are obvious things, but we are guilty of forgetting the obvious. For example, sleep deprivation's a killer. Absolute killer for me. Absolute killer.
I'm experiencing that at the moment, Andy, with a 7-month-old baby.
Well, been there, got the teeth. Damn, our conversation previous, it was like this guy's mirroring my life. Years ago. It's spooky. Can I just say those things that I've rhymed off? One of the key things for me is the habitual. It's the habit word. Eat, sleep, exercise well. The flip side to that is we don't eat well, we don't get with sleep, and we don't exercise. What is that actually going to do to us? It's going to be detrimental to us, not just on the physical side, but on the mental side. And habitual stuff for me plays a massive part in actually how we build our resilience up and actually change our mindset. Now, there was a wonderful book that that's a point, isn't it? I better stop just right there. Am I allowed to mention a book?
Oh yeah, you totally. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Just don't play any more music.
There was a wonderful book came out at Christmas time, and you may well have heard it. It's very, very. My books, they need to be big letters with pictures, and not too many.
The Hungry Caterpillar.
The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. Charlie Mackesy, and it's a wonderful book. It's beautifully illustrated, and it's one of those books. I wish I had it to hand, but in my state of moving at the moment from the house. I can't put my hand on it. But the thing is, it's one of those books that you can pick up at any time, and you don't even have to worry about your bookmark, where you're up to, because you can turn it to any page. And there's a page in there, and it picks up on that question that I mentioned, if you could write a note to yourself. And it says, being kind to yourself is one of the greatest kindnesses. And it's absolutely fabulous. Now, what about the habitual stuff? That's a great habit to get into, isn't it? Being kind to yourself. And if you think about it, if you eat well and you start to sleep well and you do a bit of exercise, actually you are being kind to yourself, aren't you? If you think about that for a minute. Now, what are the things in terms of this link and in terms of the habits and what we can do? What's really interesting for me, you mentioned COVID, Sam. Now, it's really interesting. Think to the time before COVID. Think about that time. Well over 12 months. Think about that. I remember I was just coming back from a holiday in Thailand. I'd had a fantastic time. Absolutely. And then several weeks later, bosh, you're working from home, take your laptop. And like I said, all those different job roles in the NHS. I've been on a guild trip because I don't work on the front line. I didn't have my travel time. I had more time to myself rather than doing the travel. I was actually having a guilt trip about it. But what's interesting about the COVID world, if we think prior to COVID, the public enemy number one in this country, and probably in a lot of other countries, is cortisol and the building up of cortisol. Because this is the flip side of the habitual thing. We can have and create habits to ourselves that build up the cortisol levels in our body, and it's an absolute killer. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Cortisol, okay, scientists have known for years, elevated cortisol levels do an awful lot of things. It interferes with your learning, your memory, it can lower your immune function, your bone density, increases weight gain, blood pressure, cholesterol, heart disease. It's frightening. When I started looking at the resilience stuff, and when I started off, and you remember I mentioned that nice big word at the beginning, psychoneuroimmunology, okay, laugh and be well. Actually, that's a great way of keeping your cortisol levels down. One of the things I want you to think about with this, trying to explain cortisol, there's nothing wrong. Cortisol's there for a reason. The problem in humans is we can get ourselves and do things habitually that build up the cortisol levels in the body, but it has nowhere to go. And that's very important for cortisol. It's got to have the release. So the best way I can describe that to you is, think about Mr. Attenborough and think about him doing the commentary. And he's there on the Serengeti Plains, and they're there in Africa. And there's a beautiful zebra there, and the rains have fallen in the spring, up comes the grass, and it's grazing away like a good, and he's thinking, happy days, I'm in a good mood, this is thing. Thinking to itself, maybe, what's the worst thing that could happen? And then next thing, the lioness starts prowling in the background. Next thing, there's a lion, and before you know it, you're watching as the viewer, and you're thinking, oh God, what's going to happen now? Now we know what happens is the zebra becomes alert. At that point, what happens is the adrenaline, the cortisol level, bang, rushes in, okay? And this is the bit around survival in the human being bit. So it rushes in, and then he thinks, I'm off, and the chase starts. And then while we're watching that, we're thinking, oh, please escape. I don't really fancy watching you being eaten. And actually, he manages to get away. Now, what happens is that cortisol, which is linked to fight or flight, has done its job, and the actual strenuous activity of that terrifying chase has all been released. What happens in human beings is habitually we can do things, and I would probably suggest, Sam, some of the things that you said, it does remind me, I would make a suggestion that perhaps you are habitually doing things. You're reacting to a thing or doing something because that's the way you've always done it. In other words, you've actually created the neural pathway, and it's the so what I want to just pick up on this is, let's just think about this for a minute. There's lots of people in this country that are on medication for cortisol, but there are 5 ways and they're lifestyle choices that can reduce the stress and anxiety. One of them is regular physical activity. Another one, and I'm sure you've talked about this subject on this program before, is mindfulness, that loving kindness meditation, something that's very, very popular and becoming more and more popular. Some of us practice mindfulness without realizing we're doing it. When I used to take my little dog, Charlie Brown, out for a walk under the fields every morning, I was actually doing mindfulness, because while he was running around and everything, I was sort of sorting things out in my mind and doing stuff. And so I was actually doing a form of mindfulness. The third thing is social connectivity, which is the thing that actually COVID has had a massive impact on. Massive impact. And I'm going to come to that. The other 2 things that are left, one is laughter and levity. What did I start off with? I started off with the theme of happiness. I actually added music to it. Laughter and levity, having fun and laughing reduces cortisol levels. Listening to music that you love and fits whatever your mood is in has been shown to lower cortisol levels. So I hit the music. I got a warning for it, a kind warning. I hit the music. And there was a reason for that. It's not about me setting the mood. There's a theme of that happiness that runs through all of what we're talking about now. We've come back to that thread again. And those 5 things that I've mentioned, there'll be lots of us that are doing things habitually that are building our cortisol levels up. And for me, you can do things habitually that actually what it does, it will help stave off that cortisol level and bring it down. And that is an absolutely key thing for me. Now, let me just explain something in terms of that. The other side about the habitual stuff, we get these things, and I'm sure they will know what I'm talking about here. We get what we call common cognitive distortions, and we're all guilty of it. So, for example, I know someone, for example, that ruminates on a regular basis, particularly when they're in bed and they're trying to get to sleep, and all of a sudden the cogs start going, they start to ruminate, and they start thinking about all these things. And there's lots of cognitive distortions that habitually we get into that actually don't do our cortisol levels any good. So, for example, we can filter things. We can take negative details and magnify them. So we're in the habit of doing that. We can flip that. We can flip that and start doing the positive stuff. But if we're in the habit of doing the negative, we've got to flip that round.
Yep.
Polarized thinking, for example, things have got to be either black or white. So if it's not perfect, it's no good. Oh, if it's not perfect, I've failed. You know, there's no middle ground. That you won't believe how many people think like that. We can overgeneralize. We can jump to conclusions. I know somebody, for example, that regularly catastrophizes. Catastrophizing is a terrible thing. Now, the list goes on and on, but the point I'm trying to make is a lot of us habitually do these things. Now, here's a key tip for me, and I've already touched on this early on. For me, let me give you an example of an habitual thing. I throw a question out to people, and I throw this question out a lot in the classroom, and I'll say to them, does anybody here know anyone that's bad-tempered? And what happens in the classroom, somebody might say, they might go, actually, I'm a bit bad-tempered. I do tend to fly off the handle quite quickly. I seem to, the classic one for the man isn't it? The car keys, that's the classic, isn't it? Where's my car key? Now, there is some people that it doesn't take them long, they're gritting the teeth. No, if I don't, and they get like this. Now, the habitual stuff I'm talking about, this is a classic example. I will argue this all day long. What used to happen in the classroom, by the way, people would say, actually, my dad was terribly bad-tempered. I don't know how my mum put up with him. And I always feel sorry for the dad at that moment. And I said, well, you know what? Your mum loved your dad. And that's why she put up with him. And she accepted him for what he was and not what she wanted him to be. So that's a good answer, isn't it? But let's just think about that for a minute. Think about the bad-tempered person. I will argue this day in, day out. The bad-tempered person is bad-tempered because they're habitually bad-tempered. What they are doing, they've created a neural pathway, right, in their brain that when they get some form of event before them, they react in that way because actually they've trained the brain to react that way. Now, if you're talking about strategies and talking about things that can help, because all they're doing by doing that, your cortisol levels are raising. There's three things ultimately that they can do. And it's as simple as this. The step back bit is critical. It's the taking the step back, the 5-minute thing, time out. So let's say we have lost something. And believe you me, in my recent ALF move, I put a lot of things that to test, right? Okay. With the best labeling system in the world, things start going out of hand and you've got solicitors on your back and sign this and scan this and send that. Believe you me, you can have all the strategies in the world. Let's not lose sight of the fact we're human beings, right? We're not machines, right? Which I had to keep reminding myself a lot in the last 48 hours in a big way. Now, if you want, let's take the bad-tempered analogy. So the bad-tempered person's lost the car keys, right? So let's use that as an analogy. Okay, step back. What is this issue on a scale of 1 to 10? That's a great question to ask yourself. I'm talking habitual now. What is this issue on a scale of 1 to 10? Now, the scaling question is great for lots of reasons. And you can use it in many ways. But for me, the 10, my 10, and I'm sure most people's 10, not everyone, because I put it to the test, but most people, my 10 will be death. It will be serious illness. It'll be pretty catastrophic. So then if you start putting that into your mindset, the 1 to 10 thing, yeah, what's the losing the car keys on there? When you're in the emotional state and you're in the primitive thing, feels like a 10. But when you take a step back, yeah, actually, what is it? 2 or a 3? It's not that big deal, is it? Now, the other thing is, most people, this is the laughable thing, most people have a spare set anyway, right? Best thing to do is, you know what? Can't find the keys at the moment. I'll take the spare set. I worry about those keys when I get home, because I know they're in the house. Sounds simple, doesn't it? But it's very, very difficult when that reaction is ingrained. The next question to ask yourself would be, how important is this going to be in 6 months' time? That's a fantastic question to ask yourself. And it's amazing. It gets embarrassing sometimes. Sometimes we'll all do it. We'll look back and we'll say, I can't believe I was getting stressed out about that. I can't believe that. And it's so true. And the final question I would suggest would be, is my response appropriate and effective? And if you can create a habit of that, you're going to go a long way in reducing those cortisol levels. And the habitual thing, Sam, is massive in this. And let me get this point across, if I may. Let's not disguise the fact creating a new habit is not an easy thing to do, right? You are looking at, and people might challenge this, and I'll challenge this all day long as well. You're looking at about 45 days to create a new habit, to get that neural pathway where you say, do you know what? I've created that pathway. I'm on it now. 45 days, which is why, if you think about that logically, classic time of the year, January. Right, I'm going to the gym. I've never met this guy, Jim. I don't know who he is, but he's one of the most popular people with ladies. I'm dying to meet him. But the thing is, I'm going to the gym. I'm going to start a diet. I'm going to do this. And what usually happens is 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in, think about it, 45 days. And it makes a lot of sense. And for me, a lot of the stuff that we do in terms of keeping that boosting our resilience, the well-being levels, it's the habitual stuff. And a great way of starting a new habit, by the way, if you can tag it onto an existing one, that's a pretty easy way of doing it. And I feel like I've probably said too much there.
No, your last point as well. We always refer to a book called The Atomic Habits, which talks about that as well. Dave,
Really?
I really like that there, Andy. Do you want to come in, Dave? I felt like there was a few points where you wanted to chip in.
Could you feel that? Could you?
Yeah.
I could feel it. I could feel you getting a bit fidgety.
I was going to, well, yeah, first of all, my number one rule is we get better at the things we do often. Seems really straightforward when it comes to positive things, but all of our habits are actually skills that we've practiced a lot. We just didn't intentionally practice most of them. That person who's habitually flying off the handle, so to speak, is, again, they've practiced the skill. The first time round, it probably took a while for them to get there, and then it got quicker and quicker and quicker until it felt automatic.
That's a good way of looking at it, Dave.
One big thing I would say in conjunction with your what's the issue on a scale of 1 to 10, from knowing our audience and knowing the clients that I've worked with, unfortunately, that's asking that in a vacuum as opposed to asking that alongside to, well, what other 3s and 4s and 6s have I got going on at the same time? And quite often, I know practically everyone I've spoken to has flown off the handle in one way or another, which could be shouting, could be sitting on the floor and crying, could be having a drink, whatever, over a 1. And it's not because they can't handle a 1. And this comes back to what we were saying before, is our ability to handle things and our ability to think about ourselves in a way that we can handle things. People, when they lose it over a 1, i.e. the kid's not going to bed or dropping their pizza on the floor when they're bringing it out the oven, and then they sit there and cry on the floor. And so many people then beat themselves up about the fact that, I can't believe I've lost it over this. And I often say to people, you've not lost it over that. You've lost it over all the other things plus that. And I always link it, going to the gym, I always link it to weightlifting. You know, if you put an extra kilo on a 100 kilo bar that a person can squat, but then they can't squat the 101 kilos, it's not that they're weak and they can't handle 1 kilo, it's that they can't handle 1 extra kilo on top of it. So I absolutely love that, taking an issue and saying, right, what is this particular issue on a scale of 1 to 10? But a lot of people listening, I feel, will be like, okay, yes, that I can do that, but I've also got all these other ones that I'm probably holding on to or ruminating on as well, and things technically add up. And the last thing I want to say is that when you said, is my response appropriate and effective? I have a principle called appropriate vibes only, which means, like, you know, if someone does react in a certain way, it's appropriate based on their conditioning until this point. And I think the word I really want to jump on there is it effective? Is it doing what you want? Now, for the guy who shouts, it's given them that temporary release, and we talk about this a lot. We call it boomerangs. Basically, it gives you that temporary release in the short term, away from the stress of your family or your friends or the work environment, but then it causes you more stress in the work environment later on. So it probably is effective in the moment to that person. It's just, we have to then start seeing past, okay, is this actually effective to me as a long-term strategy?
Do you want to come in, Andy?
No, interesting points, I have to say. Interesting. You made good points. I understand that. I think a key thing to be mindful of, is that I've been delivering a lot of resilience stuff now for several years. And the key point I want to point out here is that let's not, with the best will in the world, listen, I can apply strategies, and I can really work on the things that I've talked about, and I do. And I regularly take a Seligman questionnaire. I habitually do that. I've created a habit where I do a Seligman questionnaire every 3 months. And it's a 20-question thing. And it gives you a score. And there's a good reason for that. I like to see where I'm resilient. Now, interestingly, and it's not about me being swanky saying, I've got a high score. I get a pretty high score on a regular basis, and even though my score was still classed as high, and if you were defining it, it'd be very resilient, it was the lowest it's been since 2017. Now, the thing is, there's a good reason for that. There's things going on, and it's about that, isn't it? Yeah. And I think that's when you talk about a habit, the beauty of the Seligman questionnaire is, of course, you can just put that in your diary and it pops up like an appointment. And it takes about 5 minutes. But it's a useful visual, that, and it's good for reflection, and it makes you think about things like that. And I dare say, it's really interesting. And when I've done the resilience classes, everybody, when I went virtual, on the delivery. When it was classroom, we used to do I'm allowed to say Robertson Cooper, aren't I?
Yes.
I'm really, it's got me really nervous now. I'm trying to say, said it. It's like that sticky image scene where you go, oh, God, he said that, I don't believe it. You know,
there's literally one rule, and well, actually, there's don't swear, which that's the one that usually gets fired at me. but there's in terms, we've just never had the music thing come up before.
That's all right. That's all
but yeah,
right.
you can mention other sources and all the rest of it. We like to we really like to point people in the direction of other sources, to be honest.
All right. So, hey, can you see this laughter now? That's doing us a hell of a lot of good, you know. That's doing this laughter is now it's raising that level. It's unbelievable. It's boosting your immune system as we speak. That's what's going on. I've lost my thread now. Oh yeah. On the full day workshop I used to do, I used to do the Robertson Cooper questionnaire, and it sent out, and it says Robertson Cooper is Northern based, they're based in Manchester. Absolutely fantastic. You can just log on to that site, sign up. They don't bombard you with loads of emails or anything like that. They just give you maybe one every 6 weeks, every 2 months. But the beauty of it is it's got a fantastic questionnaire on there. It's more in depth than the Seligman one, and it gives you a report. Now the thing is, when I went to virtual, I used the Seligman one, so that when I was doing the virtual class, everybody that comes on the resilience class has already done the Seligman questionnaire. And what's been very fascinating about that is that when I explain what the scores mean and because there's certain bandings with the scores and what they equate to, it's amazing how many people have been pleasantly surprised at the resilience levels keeping pretty high despite COVID and despite what's been going on.
Yeah,
which is interesting, isn't it? Which says to me, basically what I'm saying to him is, do you know what? You've clearly got some good strategies. You're probably working a team that's got a good sense of purpose. You're feeding off that and benefiting off that. You know, the habits that you're doing, the habitual stuff, and lots of them do the mindfulness and all that kind of thing. And it's not coincidental that it's equating to that score.
Yeah.
And that's why, for me, it's a useful thing.
What's the name of that first questionnaire? Sorry,
Seligman. Martin Seligman, who wrote a wonderful book called the Authentic Book of Happiness, I think it's called.
But we can. I'll send a link out to everyone.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I've got it written down.
Yeah. Useful, very useful.
I mean, what you've just said then, when we were doing the intro, you said the word that comes up a lot is adaptability, right? And yes, this last year has proven just how adaptable we can be. Like, I think if anyone had had this last year presented to them as, here's what you're going to have for the next 12 months, not many people would have felt like they could handle that. But I'd love for everyone to just take a minute to look back and feel like, I'll go, this is not me swearing, badass, there we go. Just ass, ASS. Just to feel like a badass about the fact that they've got through this last year. Like, and again, some people have got through it, like a lot. Actually, most people have got through it way better than they would have thought they could.
Yeah,
I agree. Can I just say now, if anyone has any questions, please do put them in the chat for Dave to read out at the end. We've kind of touched on this in a sense in terms of you talking about habits, but the last point was basically, how do we maintain the resilience we've built up? Yeah,
absolutely. You're right. We have touched on that in terms of that with the habits thing, Sam. For me, crikey, this subject matter, I'll tell you one thing that I've always been a great believer in as well, and something that I'd like to, and I'm conscious of time now, because am I right in saying this is the 1 hour slot, isn't it?
No, we say it's the staff hour, it's ish. Normally it goes over more or less every time, but that's fine.
Does it? That's deadly with me. You know what I mean? 7 o'clock at night it was when I got on. Anyway, one of the things that I think is really important with this as well, and there's a big link to it. If you remember when I was saying about there's a flip to things. I'm a great believer. When we talk about the habitual, I mentioned the stuff there prior about the things we do habitually that actually raise our cortisol levels. what I like to do things that affect what we call the happiness chemicals in the brain. There's a wonderful thing that says happiness chemicals and how to hack into them. And the happiness chemicals thing for me, this is a fantastic way of actually how we can maintain our resilience levels. Because when you start talking about habitual things, yes, I've talked about things like the obvious things like the exercise stuff and negative thoughts, but there are simple things that we can do. Do you know, it's a fascinating area. And let me just throw this out. If I may touch on the happiness chemicals for a minute, because I think it's very important. Let me just band some of these off for you. There's basically four. Serotonin is a fascinating one. It's called the mood stabilizer. You might be able to relate to this, Sam, when what you were aligning to earlier on. If you're in a good mood, right, you've got serotonin to thank. But if you're in a bad mood, you've got serotonin to blame. It's very, very interesting. What do we make? The thing about serotonin, let me give you a little tip here. The vast majority of people in this country, they are brought up like in having a preference for plain chocolate, right? Now, how's he got to chocolate and where's this leading? Well, I'll explain it for you.
I like where it's going.
You like where it's going, do you? You like where it's going? Well, you might not do because it's going across the channel. If you go across the channel and you go in a French supermarket, the minimum cocoa content in their chocolate is 52% cocoa. Now, if you look at the cocoa content in milk chocolate, what is it? I don't know, probably 18, something like that. But what I'm getting at is this. It may not even be that. When we talk about a serotonin, and it's a mood stabilizer, basically. Serotonin is classed as a brain chemical. What's very interesting about it is 80% of it sits in your gut. We've got two brains in our body. We've got this thing that's encased in here, but we've got one a bit lower down, about the size of a tennis ball, and it sits in your gut. Now, what's interesting about serotonin, it's classed as a brain chemical. Yes, 80% of it sits in your gut. And what's happening is it starts to transmit messages back and forward. Have a think about that for a minute. You know, that's a fantastic expression, that, isn't it? My gut feeling. We often say that, don't we? And how many of us follow it? And maybe how many of us has not followed it and then looked and reflected back and think, what my gut feeling was. It's a fascinating thing. Do you know there's a way that you can boost your serotonin level by just simply eating a bit of dark chocolate? 70% cocoa, right? Get yourself a bar of 70% plain chocolate. The lints, am I allowed to say that? He got me on it.
You are. Homes Under the Hammer came up twice last week, so.
Get a well-known chocolate manufacturer, right? Thank you. Get the plain chocolate, or if you're posh like me, you go in Marks and Sparks food hall, and you get 70% cocoa bar for a couple of quid, and it's even got vanilla, so it's even better, because actually vanilla is a fantastic one for your endorphins, so it's a win-win. But this is a little habit. If you talk about habits, get your little bar of plain chocolate, snap 4 squares off, and eat that about an hour and a half before you go into bed. Just 4 squares, no more than that. What happens is, when you go to bed, the cocoa content out of that chocolate starts going up here, transmitting through up to the brain, and it starts to affect your serotonin level in your brain. When you wake up in the morning, something, maybe a task, maybe a challenge, something that you were putting up, you might think, do you know what, I'm going to nail that today. I'm going to crack it. I'm feeling great. I'm feeling positive. Do you know what? I take that chocolate 2 or 3 times a week, and I've created that habit to do that because I'm convinced that it improves my serotonin level. And here's another thing. When you start looking at all the different, if you look at serotonin, for example, what are the things that how do you hack into it? You hack into it with mindfulness, exercise, swimming, cycling, things like that, outside in nature. Yeah. I love my little cuckoo clock for you. Also, if you look at, for example, dopamine levels, that's the reward chemical. How do we reward that? Completing a task, doing self-care activities, celebrating little wins. An endorphin one is laughter, watching a comedy, exercising, essential oils. What you tend to find is sometimes you might say, I'm in a good mood. Well, it might be if you've completed a task, right? and this is quite a common one. Habitually, you create that habit of completing. That's why some people, they might say things like, "Oh, I like to clean," and they clean something within 30 minutes. They transfer. It's like gardening, doing an hanging basket or doing a bed of weeds. Within 30 minutes, you've planted out and put flowers in. What's happened is you've had a dopamine hit, and I'm a great believer in actually habitually, if you can hack into these in an habitual way, that is how you're going to maintain your resilience levels. It's a simple way, but it's effective, and I'm a great believer in it. I don't say to people, do this, do that. I don't tell. I can merely point and advise. Of course, in the world of the brain chemicals, happiness chemicals, the one that's took the massive hit with COVID is oxytocin. Because oxytocin actually is your trust hormone. And this is the one where holding hands, having a hug, that kind of thing, that's not been possible with COVID, which would explain a lot of it. If maybe when I go back to the questionnaire thing, those levels in terms of your scores are a bit lower, it may be that if you've got more of a preference and in terms of the happiness chemicals and oxytocin and boosting that plays a big part in your life, that would explain why your resilience levels have dropped lower, perhaps more than other people's, because we don't all need that. Some of us need it more. Interestingly, a good way of boosting your oxytocin level is giving compliments. Now, I know I've gone on quite a bit there, but the answer really, Sam, is it's that habitual thing again. And it's amazing if you can tap into what's going on in here and these chemicals and just do simple things, you will maintain your resilience levels. There's no doubt about that.
Perfect. Thanks, Andy. Dave, is there any comments, or do you want to say anything?
There's one question from earlier, which I'm really keen to find the answer out on as well, actually, which is, what do you do with resilience burnout?
Resilience burnout. That's interesting. Now, I mentioned change curve. I'm sure I did. And on the change curve starts off with, at the far, if I was doing a diagram now, there's shock. And right at the other side, there's, right, let's get cracking. And right in the slump, in the middle of the curve at the bottom, there's a bit of there's this, where we're absolutely burnt out. We're actually got a bit depressed and all the rest of it. When we get that burnout, the best thing I can suggest is, first of all, remember this. We're human beings. I don't mind now. Listen, I've got all the resilience strategies in the world. I've got great habits, but I don't lose sight of the fact that sometimes I'm a human being, and I can burn out and I can fall. And I don't mind admitting this. I wasn't in the best of places yesterday, believe you me. There was a lot going on emotionally, and I recognised that. And I just simply had to sit down, sit back, and I really had to just, a good way of thinking about it is really, it's just literally taking that time out, taking stock, and really not doing anything as such, just taking it on board, and then maybe doing something quite simple, just anything, even if it's just, you know what, I'm just going to have a little walk for 5 minutes or something like that. But what I'm getting at is, don't beat yourself up, because we're all human beings and we can all have burnout. I guess for me, when you're in that danger of burnout, the analogy is we can bend. It's a bit like thinking of the palm tree. We can bend, but we don't want to break. And I'm in this new house at the moment. I've had my cuckoo clock and now my phone's ringing. Well, the house is ringing, but hey-ho, I'm going to ignore that. But on a serious note, it's a very, very good question. I think really it's almost like taking that time out for yourself, recognizing that you're a human being. Do you know what? And actually very, very slowly just start doing some simple things.
Yeah.
And I guess that's my best answer. I don't know how you pick up on that, Dave.
No, I completely agree. What I work with a lot of people with depression and with anxiety, and ultimately, when they learn the tools to be able to deal with these, what we tend to see is a nice big pickup at first, because now they're more equipped to handle the situation. But then eventually you burn out from using the tools, because you are still technically fighting a battle with it every single day. You're just a little bit more equipped. And something I often say to people is that some days it's right to rest even from your self-care. Some days it's right to rest even from the things that you're doing, that battle your depression or battle your anxiety, because actually constantly fighting that battle, like every single day, is the thing that leads to us sometimes losing the war. And it's like, it's okay to take a day where you're not constantly working on your self-development, because most people, once you start working on self-development and you get those nice early results, those early wins, it can become, you get the person that's never been to the gym before. They go to the gym 3 times a week and they love it, so then they go 6 times a week and then they still love it, so then they go twice a day, and now you're doing more harm than good with the gym, or the effects don't work the same. And then the person, throws the baby out with the bathwater, basically. And people often stop completely doing the things if they feel that they're really struggling and they've got all the things there and they've just not got the energy to do the things those days. If we accept that and we take that day to say, you know what, we're not going to push back, we're not going to fight today, we're going to let this particular storm, we're going to let this storm pass, right? We're not going to row against it, we're just going to drop anchor and we're going to let this storm pass. Then those people go back to using the techniques again. But you get some people that will have that day, and that'll be the day where they're like, well, forget these techniques, forget these. And the thing is, I talk about, rather than motivation, momentum. And when you stop like exercising, when you stop like having that mindfulness, or you stop eating better, or you stop connecting with people, if you stop, the longer you'll stop for, the harder it is to get started again. And I call this your mental health diet. The problem is, so many people are out there saying that exercise will cure your mental health, and I literally ranted about this on, I think it was Instagram yesterday, maybe. I was like stop saying, if you've ever said that exercise can cure your mental health, and please stop. It's like it can alleviate symptoms, but if you're telling someone this is a cure and they don't get a cure from it, because exercise might work. It works 1,000,000% for him, but he has to run 26 miles a day in order for it to work for him. But like, it'll work more for some people than others. And therefore, if we advertise it as this 100% cure all, and a person goes out and starts doing it and they don't get the effect that they're actually looking for, then people they stop. When a lot of these solutions we're saying today, none of them is the answer. They are all part of an overall answer. And we need to understand that exercise is going to be 5% for one person, 50% for another. Nutrition is going to be 20% for one person, 40% for another. Meditation might work 95% for someone and only 5% for somebody else. But there's a great Jim Carrey quote, which is like, I believe that depression is real, but I also believe that if we're not eating nutritious food, exercising, getting sunlight, connecting with people, then we're not giving ourselves a fighting chance. And I think that really strikes the balance really nicely, because out there in the mental health world, we're either told like, just get on with it, or your mental health's not real, or it's okay not to be okay, and we're okay to sit where we are and not make any changes. And really, we want to bring people a little bit more into that. Okay, even if it helps you 5%, that's better. 5%'s better than nothing,
Yeah, I think
I'd say that is the. Sorry, go on, Andy.
No, go on. All right.
No. Yeah, I'll let you go. Go on, because then I'll round it up.
No, I was going to say, I come back to the bit about being kind to yourself. I think it's very, very important that. I think part of the answer, if you think about that, being kind to yourself is very, very important. If you think about this for a minute, if you're not doing something, you're not shaping so good, you tend to say to yourself, oh, come on, what's the matter with you? Well, come on, get hold of yourself, what's up?
Yeah.
But if it was your friend and they were in a bit of a state, you won't say that to them. You say, right, come on, I'll tell you what, let's have a cup of tea and we'll have a talk about it. And you say, you don't do that to yourself, do you?
Yeah.
Well, but when you create the habit, that's a great thing to do to yourself. Think about that.
Yeah,
it's true.
Absolutely. And speaking to yourself kindly, going back to the habit thing, you've spoken to yourself. If you're 28, you've probably spent 22 years of your life speaking to yourself badly. If you're 48, you've probably spent 42 years of your life speaking to yourself badly, right? And so if a bunch of dudes on the internet turn around and say, well, you just need to speak to yourself nicely, it's like, okay, cool, I'm going to go and nail this now. It's probably not going to work the way you want it to on the first go. You're also probably not going to be good at it on the first go. You might need those 45 days. You might need to make a conscious effort over the next 45 days and beyond. Every time you catch yourself putting yourself down, to actually, instead of beating yourself up, big yourself up. And it might be really hard for some people. It's hard. I know it's hard for a lot of people to give themselves a compliment because they don't believe it yet. And you might have to start small. You might have to say, you know what, I'm proud of myself just for trying today. I'm proud of myself that I'm a good friend. You might even have to pick qualities about yourself that I'm always there for other people. I'm proud of myself for that. Even if you're not proud of yourself yet for the things that you teach, that you are to yourself. And yeah, it can become a habit, but I find so many people give up on that habit because they're like, oh, I tried talking kind to myself and it didn't work. Okay, how long did you try it for? That's like being £6,000 in debt and putting a fiver in it. You're not out of debt until you've put £6,000 back in there. And basically, we're in self-esteem debt. We're pretty much all of us are in self-esteem debt and have been over our entire lives. It's going to take a bit of time. It's going to take a bit of practice, and it's going to take making it habitual, like you said earlier. But do it seriously. Speak to other people. Speak to yourself like you would somebody else, because we know what we say to other people would bring them down. We all hate the idea of trolls. We hate the fact that people can pick on us on the internet, but we pick on ourselves inside of our own heads all the time. Why do we think we can guilt ourselves into greatness? I don't know.
Yeah, the person you talk to yourself the most in your life is yourself. And it's very, very true. Can I finish off with a quote, Sam?
Yeah, that's fine, Andy. Yep, then we'll round it up.
I've got this little quote for you here. There's something for you to think about. 1 minute of anger weakens the immune system for 4 to 5 hours. 1 minute of laughter boosts the immune system for 24 hours. Now, there's been quite a bit of laughter going on between us three while we've been doing this. So I would suggest our immune systems are pretty set for the next maybe 24 to 36 hours. Think about it.
Perfect. We'll round it up there. Andy, thank you very much for joining us. I hope that everyone who's watched today has found it really informative. I've personally really enjoyed this webinar. I enjoyed the start as well when we played Happy. That's one of my highlights, actually. So if you have any questions following this stream, then please do email me on sam.tyrer, Tyrer @lscft. So thank you very much, Andy, once again. Thanks, Dave, and thank you for joining us. So we'll end the live stream, and then Andy, just stay on the call for a second.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. 1 second.